The loneliest birthday is not the one without presents. It is the one where the people you once gave everything for never bother to knock. The morning sunlight poured gently through the towering windows of Romano Manor, painting long golden lines across polished marble floors that looked as flawless as they had 20 years ago. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Fresh white roses filled silver vases, and a dining table nearly 40 feet long stood perfectly prepared for a celebration worthy of one of the most respected men the city had ever known. Fine china rested beside polished silverware. Linen napkins had been folded with remarkable precision. A towering birthday cake decorated with elegant white frosting waited patiently beneath soft candlelight. Every detail had been arranged exactly as it had been every year before. Yet this year, something was painfully different. Vincent Romano sat quietly beside the grand window in a handcrafted wheelchair made of dark walnut and polished steel. His tailored black suit fit him as sharply as ever, while intricate tattoos disappeared beneath the collar of his crisp white shirt and extended across his hands with faded elegance. Once, people had lowered their voices when he entered a room. Today, only silence greeted him. He lifted his wrist and glanced at the antique watch his late father had given him years before. 10 o'clock. The first guests were supposed to arrive 30 minutes earlier. Samuel Brooks, the estate's elderly but faithful butler, stepped into the room carrying a fresh pot of coffee. His silver hair reflected the morning light as he quietly filled Vincent's cup without saying a word. He had served the Romano family for nearly 35 years. He understood that some disappointments became heavier when spoken aloud. Vincent finally broke the silence. "Any calls?" Samuel hesitated for only a heartbeat. "Not yet, sir." Vincent nodded once before staring toward the long driveway stretching beyond the iron gates. It remained completely empty. No luxury sedans, no black SUVs, no familiar faces. Only autumn leaves drifting peacefully across the pavement. Another hour passed. The birthday cake remained untouched. The coffee grew cold. A pianist hired for the afternoon rehearsal quietly packed his sheet music after receiving instructions that there would be no performance today. Housekeepers exchanged sympathetic glances while pretending to straighten decorations that no one would ever admire. Even the florist looked uncomfortable as fresh flowers slowly began to lose their morning brilliance. Vincent continued watching the front entrance with remarkable composure. He did not complain. He did not ask anyone to call his former associates. He simply waited with the quiet dignity of a man refusing to let loneliness become humiliation. At noon, Samuel carefully approached once more. "Would you like lunch served, sir?" Vincent smiled faintly without taking his eyes from the window. "Let us give them another hour." Samuel nodded, although both men already understood the answer hidden inside that request. Across the city, business meetings continued. Charity galas were announced. Expensive restaurants welcomed afternoon guests. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Only Romano Manor seemed frozen in another time, holding its breath for people who had already decided not to come. By early afternoon, the sunlight softened, casting longer shadows across the empty chairs surrounding the grand dining table. 36 seats had been prepared. 36 remained vacant. Vincent slowly rolled his wheelchair closer to the table and looked at every untouched place setting. Years ago, these chairs had been impossible to reserve. Politicians, executives, community leaders, and lifelong friends had competed for invitations. Now the room echoed with nothing except the ticking of an old grandfather clock. Samuel quietly reached toward the birthday candles, intending to remove them before they melted in the afternoon warmth. Vincent gently raised one hand. "Leave them." Samuel stopped immediately. "Yes, sir." Neither man noticed the small figure standing just beyond the front gates until the estate intercom chimed softly. A hesitant voice from security spoke through the speaker. "Sir, there's a young woman outside with a little girl. They are carrying a homemade cake. They insist they are here because no one should spend a birthday alone." Samuel looked toward Vincent, waiting for instructions. The old butler had learned long ago that every important decision inside Romano Manor began with silence before it became words. Vincent rested his hands calmly upon the polished wooden arms of his wheelchair, his thoughtful eyes fixed on the security monitor displaying the front gate. A young woman stood there wearing a neatly pressed but inexpensive beige coat over a simple blue dress that had clearly been repaired more than once. Beside her, a little girl no older than 7 held a small white bakery box with both hands as though protecting the most valuable treasure in the world. A handful of wildflowers rested against her shoulder, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Neither of them appeared nervous. They simply waited with quiet patience. Vincent finally spoke. "Bring them inside." Samuel smiled almost imperceptibly before pressing the intercom button. "Please escort our guests to the main hall." Minutes later, the enormous front doors opened, allowing a cool autumn breeze to drift across the marble floor. The little girl stepped inside first, her wide brown eyes immediately lifting toward the grand staircase and crystal chandeliers. "Mom," she whispered softly, "this house looks like something from a fairy tale." The young woman smiled gently. "Remember your manners, Lily." Vincent watched them approach. There was nothing remarkable about their clothing, nothing expensive about the carefully wrapped cake they carried, and yet somehow they brought more warmth into the mansion than the elaborate decorations surrounding them. Samuel accepted the homemade cake with both hands as though it belonged beside the magnificent, untouched birthday cake already waiting on the table. "Thank you," he said sincerely. The young woman nodded politely. "My name is Grace Parker. This is my daughter, Lily. We hope we are not disturbing your afternoon." Vincent looked at them for a long moment before answering. "You're the only visitors who arrived today." Grace's expression softened with genuine sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that." Lily slowly walked closer, still holding the bouquet of wildflowers. "Happy birthday, mister," she said with complete innocence. "These flowers grew near our apartment. Mommy said the prettiest presents do not always come from stores." Vincent accepted the bouquet carefully. For a brief moment, he seemed unsure what to say. The flowers were simple. A few daisies, goldenrod, purple asters. Yet no gift he had ever received carried more honesty. Samuel quietly cleared his throat. "Would you care for some tea?" Grace immediately smiled. "Only if it is not any trouble." "It will be my pleasure." As Samuel disappeared toward the kitchen, Lily noticed the enormous, untouched birthday cake. "That cake is beautiful," she whispered. "But cakes are happier after someone blows out the candles." Vincent looked toward the glowing candles that had continued burning for hours. "I suppose they are." Lily tilted her head thoughtfully. "Then maybe you should make a wish before they burn out." Grace gently placed a hand upon her daughter's shoulder. "Lily, do not trouble Mr. Romano." Vincent surprised them both by smiling, a quiet, genuine smile that had not appeared on his face in many months. "She is not troubling me." The room seemed different already. Housekeepers who had been pretending to dust furniture now found themselves smiling without realizing it. Even the afternoon sunlight appeared warmer as it reflected across polished marble floors. Grace glanced around the nearly empty dining room with 36 untouched chairs. She understood immediately what had happened without anyone explaining it. Some absences spoke louder than words. Instead of asking questions, she quietly removed a folded birthday card from her purse. "Lily made this herself," she said. Vincent accepted the handmade card carefully. On the front was a simple drawing of a smiling sun beside a house. Inside, written in large, uneven letters, were the words, "Nobody should celebrate alone." Vincent lowered the card slowly, his eyes lingering on every handwritten letter. Outside, another luxury vehicle quietly slowed near the estate gates before turning away without entering, while inside Romano Manor, something far more valuable than a guest list had just begun to arrive. The aroma of freshly brewed tea slowly filled the grand dining room, blending with the faint scent of roses and vanilla frosting until Romano Manor no longer felt like an empty palace waiting for forgotten guests. Samuel placed a polished silver tea service on the table before carefully moving the enormous birthday cake aside, just enough to make room for the small homemade cake Lily and Grace had brought. It looked almost insignificant beside the elegant masterpiece prepared by professional chefs, yet somehow everyone's attention drifted naturally toward the smaller one. Its uneven white icing carried tiny imperfections. Colorful candy sprinkles had been scattered by small hands, and the words "Happy Birthday" were written with slightly crooked blue frosting. Vincent found himself staring at it longer than he expected. Grace noticed his expression and smiled modestly. Lily insisted on decorating it herself. Lily nodded proudly. The frosting kept sliding off, but Mommy said love does not have to look perfect. Samuel quietly chuckled as he poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. Your mother is a wise woman. Grace laughed softly. She would disagree. For the first time that entire day, gentle conversation replaced the silence that had weighed upon every room. Lily eagerly described the small apartment where they lived, the stray cat she secretly fed behind their building, and the tiny garden she hoped to plant next spring if they could save enough money for flower seeds. Vincent listened carefully, asking simple questions instead of offering polite nods. He realized he could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him without wanting something in return. Every answer from the little girl came freely, filled with curiosity rather than caution. As tea was served, Samuel quietly handed Vincent the homemade birthday card once more. Perhaps there is something else inside, sir. Vincent opened it again and noticed a folded sheet of notebook paper tucked behind the drawing. Lily looked slightly embarrassed. That is my birthday wish for you. Vincent unfolded the page carefully. Written in large, uneven handwriting were only 3 short sentences. I hope somebody makes you laugh today. I hope you never eat birthday cake alone again. I hope next year your house feels like a home. Vincent read the words twice before quietly placing the paper beside his cup. His eyes lingered on the final sentence longer than the others. Grace lowered her voice. She writes wishes instead of letters. She believes wishes travel farther. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon sun slowly slipped behind drifting clouds, softening the golden light across the estate gardens. Inside, one of the housekeepers cautiously approached Samuel. Sir, she whispered. The kitchen staff was wondering if they might join the celebration for just a few minutes after finishing dinner preparations. Samuel smiled warmly. I believe Mr. Romano would welcome that. Vincent overheard every word. Instead of objecting, he simply nodded. Everyone who wishes to celebrate is invited. The message quietly spread through the mansion. Gardeners removed their gloves. Drivers stepped away from the garage. Housekeepers finished their work early. Even the elderly groundskeeper who rarely entered the main house carefully brushed the dirt from his boots before walking toward the dining room. None of them arrived because they were expected. They came because someone had reminded them that birthdays were meant to be shared. Lily looked around as more familiar faces entered one by one. See, Mommy, she whispered with a hopeful smile. Sometimes people just need someone to go first. Grace gently squeezed her daughter's hand, but her attention shifted toward Vincent. The loneliness that had filled his eyes only hours earlier had begun to soften into something quieter, something warmer. Yet, while the dining room slowly filled with genuine smiles, a black luxury sedan remained parked across the street beyond the estate gates. Inside, a well-dressed man lowered a pair of binoculars and quietly placed a phone call. He is smiling again, he said calmly. Someone unexpected has changed the plan. Then the call ended before another word was spoken. The celebration lasted well into the early evening, not because it was extravagant, but because no one seemed eager to leave. The mansion that had awakened to silence now echoed with gentle laughter, quiet conversations, and the familiar sounds of ordinary people sharing an ordinary afternoon that somehow felt extraordinary. The kitchen staff insisted everyone take a second slice of cake. The gardeners compared stories with the chauffeurs. Housekeepers who had spent years moving quietly through the estate without being noticed found themselves sitting beside Vincent's table, speaking freely for the first time. Grace watched the scene unfold with quiet gratitude. She had expected to stay only a few minutes. Instead, she had unknowingly helped restore something far more valuable than a birthday celebration. Lily wandered toward the grand piano, standing near the library entrance. Her small fingers gently touched the polished wood without pressing a single key. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Samuel smiled warmly. "Would you like to hear it?" She nodded excitedly. Samuel sat on the piano bench and slowly played a gentle melody that had once been Vincent's mother's favorite birthday song. The music drifted through the mansion like sunlight, entering a room that had been closed for years. Vincent closed his eyes for a brief moment. Memories he had buried beneath responsibility and discipline quietly returned. His mother laughing beside that very piano. His father singing slightly off-key while everyone pretended not to notice. A house once filled with family rather than influence. When the final note faded into silence, Lily quietly clapped her hands. "That sounded happy," she said. Samuel smiled. "It reminds us that some songs never disappear. They simply wait for someone willing to listen again." Grace noticed a framed family photograph resting on the piano. It showed a much younger Vincent standing confidently beside his parents, smiling with a warmth almost impossible to recognize now. "You look different," she said softly before immediately apologizing. "I'm sorry. I should not have said that." Vincent surprised her with another gentle smile. "You are right. I was different." He looked toward the photograph. "Back then, I believed success meant filling every room with important people. Today I learned that one sincere visitor can mean more than 100 impressive guests." Grace lowered her eyes thoughtfully. Sometimes life removes the crowd, so we can finally recognize the people who truly belong. Her words lingered in the room long after she finished speaking. Outside, dusk slowly settled across the estate. Warm lights illuminated the gardens while fallen leaves danced across the long driveway that had remained empty all day. Yet beyond the stone gates, the same black luxury sedan still waited in the shadows. Inside, the well-dressed observer reviewed photographs taken throughout the afternoon. Every image showed Vincent smiling, surrounded by employees instead of executives, by kindness instead of influence. He quietly placed the photographs into a folder labeled Romano Estate before making another brief telephone call. "The people we expected to abandon him have already done so," he said calmly. "The unexpected guests are becoming the real problem." He listened for several seconds before ending the call and driving away without entering the property. Back inside the mansion, Samuel approached Vincent carrying a leather appointment book that had remained unopened throughout the day. "Sir," he said carefully, "I almost forgot." Vincent looked up. "Forgot what?" Samuel opened the book to the current date. Nearly every scheduled birthday appointment had been crossed out during the past week. Business partners, former associates, social clubs, charity boards. Each cancellation had arrived politely, one after another, until the page had become almost entirely empty. Only one appointment remained untouched. Written in neat handwriting was a simple note Samuel did not remember adding. 4 o'clock. Welcome whoever chooses kindness over obligation. Vincent stared at the words in silence. He knew he had never written them. Samuel had not written them either. Yet somehow the only appointment that had not been canceled had become the only one that truly mattered. The following morning arrived with a quiet stillness that felt entirely different from the silence of the day before. Sunlight spilled across the gardens, warming the dew that rested upon rows of white roses, while birds settled comfortably among the towering oak trees surrounding Romano Manor. For the first time in many months, Vincent asked Samuel to open every curtain in the mansion. "Let the light in," he said calmly. Samuel smiled as he pulled the heavy velvet drapes aside. "It has been a long time since you asked for that, sir." Vincent watched the golden morning fill the library and simply replied, "Perhaps I've been looking in the wrong direction." Shortly after breakfast, the front gate intercom chimed once again. Samuel glanced toward the security monitor before a gentle smile spread across his face. Grace and Lily had returned. This time they carried no cake, no flowers, and no gifts. Lily held only a canvas tote filled with library books, while Grace carried a small basket containing homemade blueberry muffins wrapped neatly in a kitchen towel. Samuel welcomed them warmly. "Good morning. Mr. Romano has been expecting you." Grace looked surprised. "Expecting us?" Samuel nodded. "He asked me twice this morning what time the two of you might arrive." As they entered the sunlit library, Vincent looked up from a leather-bound history book resting across his lap. Lily smiled brightly. "We came because I forgot to read you a birthday story yesterday." Vincent closed his book. "Then I suppose today is the perfect day to hear it." Lily carefully climbed into a large reading chair across from him and opened one of her library books. It was a simple children's story about an old lighthouse that continued shining every night, even after ships stopped passing its shore. Her young voice filled the room with quiet warmth as she read each page slowly, pausing whenever she reached a difficult word. Vincent listened more attentively than he had listened to board meetings or business negotiations in years. When she finished, she closed the book gently and looked at him. "Do you know why I like that story?" Vincent smiled. "Tell me." Lily answered without hesitation. "Because the lighthouse never stopped doing something good just because people stopped noticing it." The room became perfectly still. Samuel lowered his eyes. Grace looked toward the window, allowing her daughter to speak without interruption. Vincent quietly repeated the sentence to himself. Something inside him shifted. For months he had measured his worth by who still visited, who still called, and who still remembered. A 7-year-old child had unknowingly offered a different way to measure a life. Grace finally broke the silence. Children sometimes discover truths adults spend years searching for. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you are right." Later that afternoon, Samuel entered carrying a neatly organized folder. "Sir, I reviewed every charitable donation made through the Romano Foundation over the past 15 years, just as you requested." Vincent accepted the folder with curiosity. Grace looked confused. "Why would you need those records?" Vincent slowly opened the first page. Thousands of families had received quiet assistance over the years through anonymous scholarships, medical grants, rent assistance, and emergency food programs. He had personally approved many of them without ever learning the names of those receiving help. As Samuel turned another page, a familiar address caught Vincent's attention. The apartment building where Grace and Lily currently lived had received emergency housing assistance nearly 8 years earlier after a devastating winter storm damaged several units. Vincent looked toward Grace. "Did you live there then?" She nodded slowly. "We did." Samuel quietly continued reading the report. The assistance was approved personally by Mr. Romano after reviewing a request submitted by Neighborhood Church. Grace stared at Vincent in complete surprise. "I never knew who helped us." Vincent looked equally surprised. "Neither did I." Grace lowered her eyes as memories she had carefully tucked away for years quietly returned. She gently traced the edge of the donation report with her fingertips before looking toward the tall windows where sunlight danced across the gardens. "That winter was the hardest season of our lives," she said softly. "Lily was still a baby. I was working 2 jobs, and after the storm damaged our apartment building, I truly believed we would lose everything." Vincent listened without interrupting. He had learned that the most important stories were often told in quiet voices. Grace continued. "Then someone paid for emergency repairs, temporary housing, and groceries for every family in the building. Nobody ever told us who it was. The church simply said that a generous donor wanted to help without being thanked." She smiled faintly. "I promised myself that if life ever gave me enough strength, I would try to do the same for someone else." Samuel slowly closed the donation folder. Mr. Romano insisted years ago that every family receiving assistance remain anonymous, even to him. He believed kindness should never become a transaction. Vincent looked down thoughtfully. "I almost forgot my own reason for starting the foundation." Lily quietly climbed down from her chair and walked toward Vincent. Without saying anything, she gently wrapped her small arms around him. It was the simple, innocent embrace of a child who believed comfort never required permission. Vincent remained still for a brief moment before carefully placing one tattooed hand across her back. His eyes closed, and for the first time since the accident that had changed his life, he allowed himself to accept comfort instead of pretending he did not need it. Grace watched the quiet moment with unexpected emotion. She hugs people whenever she thinks they are carrying something too heavy, she explained softly. Vincent smiled. She is remarkably observant. Lily looked up at him with complete sincerity. My teacher says people are not broken just because something about them changed. They are only different. Vincent nodded slowly. Your teacher sounds very wise. She says everybody needs someone who believes in them before they remember how to believe in themselves. Those words settled gently into the room like sunlight across old wood. Later that afternoon, Grace offered to help Samuel organize books in the library while Lily sat beside Vincent, carefully assembling a small puzzle she had brought from home. Piece by piece, colorful images slowly formed across the polished table. Vincent noticed that Lily never became frustrated when a piece did not fit. She simply smiled and tried another place. You are very patient, he observed. Lily shrugged. Mom says rushing never helps a puzzle. Grace laughed quietly from across the room. I remind myself of that advice more than I remind her. As the afternoon drifted toward evening, Samuel returned carrying another leather folder recovered from the Foundation archives. There is something else you should see, sir. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you letters sent over many years by families who never knew whether their messages had reached the anonymous donor. Most had never been opened because Vincent had instructed the staff not to reveal recipients' identities. One envelope, however, had accidentally been placed among administrative files instead of the unopened collection. Samuel carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting belonged to Grace. It had been written 8 years earlier. Thank you to the person who reminded my daughter that good people still exist. Someday, if we ever meet, I hope I recognize your kindness before I recognize your success. Vincent quietly lowered the letter into his lap. Grace covered her mouth in surprise. She had forgotten she had ever written those words. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Outside, the evening sky glowed with soft shades of amber and lavender, while inside Romano Manor, two lives slowly came to understand that the greatest acts of generosity often complete a circle many years after they first begin. The following week brought an unexpected rhythm to Romano Manor. Every afternoon, just after school, Grace and Lily stopped by for an hour before returning to their small apartment across town. They never arrived with expensive gifts or grand plans. Sometimes Grace brought fresh bread she had baked before sunrise. Sometimes Lily carried another library book tucked beneath her arm. Other afternoons, they simply shared conversation over tea, while Samuel prepared warm cookies that filled the mansion with the comforting aroma of butter and cinnamon. The employees quietly noticed that the house no longer felt abandoned. Laughter echoed through hallways that had been silent for months, and sunlight seemed brighter simply because people had begun opening windows instead of closing themselves away from the world. Vincent also changed in ways that could not be measured by doctors or medical reports. He smiled more often. He asked Samuel to schedule meetings with the Romano Foundation once again. He spent mornings reviewing scholarship requests instead of staring through empty windows. One afternoon, while organizing old financial records, Samuel carefully placed a stack of unopened correspondence on Vincent's desk. These arrived after your accident, he explained. Many people stopped writing once they learned you had withdrawn from public life, but a few continued sending letters every month. Vincent slowly untied the ribbon around the stack. Most were handwritten notes from families the foundation had quietly helped over the years. Teachers, veterans, nurses, parents, small business owners. None of them asked for money. They simply wanted the anonymous donor to know their lives had become better because someone had believed in them. Vincent looked toward Grace. I spent years thinking people had forgotten me. Grace smiled gently. The wrong people did. Samuel nodded in quiet agreement. The right people simply never knew where to find you. Those words settled deeply into Vincent's heart. That evening he asked Samuel to arrange a small gathering in the library, not for executives or former associates, but for every employee working at the estate. Gardeners, drivers, housekeepers, maintenance workers, cooks, security staff, and office assistants all arrived with curious expressions. They expected another routine meeting. Instead, Vincent welcomed each person by name. He thanked the groundskeeper for protecting the gardens through every season. He thanked the kitchen staff for continuing to prepare meals even when he rarely came downstairs. He thanked the housekeepers for preserving the memories inside the mansion instead of merely cleaning it. Many of them lowered their eyes with emotion because no one had ever spoken to them that way before. Grace quietly watched from the back of the room, beside Lily, who whispered, "Mom, everybody looks happier." Grace nodded softly. People bloom when they know they matter. After everyone had gathered, Vincent placed a simple wooden box on the library table. Inside were dozens of handwritten invitation cards. "Next month," he said calmly, "the Romano Foundation will reopen its community reading program for children and families. I would like every one of you to participate if you wish. Not because it is your job, but because kindness grows stronger when it is shared." The room filled with warm applause. It was not loud or dramatic. It was sincere. As employees began discussing ideas with genuine excitement, Lily quietly walked to the large world map hanging on the library wall. She placed a small gold star sticker over their hometown. Vincent smiled. "What does that star mean?" Lily answered proudly. "That is where somebody decided to be kind first." Everyone in the room turned toward the little sticker, and for a brief moment the grand mansion felt less like the home of a powerful family and more like the heart of a growing community. Yet outside the estate, inside a downtown office overlooking the city skyline, one former business partner studied the newspaper announcing the foundation's reopening. He slowly folded the article, looked toward the empty chair across his conference table, and quietly admitted to himself, "We all believed his strength disappeared when he stopped walking. We never realized it had simply found a different way to stand." The reopening of the Romano Foundation became the quiet event no one expected to matter and the one everyone would later remember. On a bright Saturday morning, families from every corner of the city gathered beneath white tents arranged across the estate gardens. Folding tables overflowed with donated books, children's art supplies, warm meals, and fresh flowers picked by volunteers before sunrise. Teachers welcomed students with cheerful smiles while retired librarians carefully organized reading corners beneath the shade of ancient oak trees. Nothing about the gathering felt extravagant. Its beauty came from ordinary people choosing to spend their weekend, lifting one another instead of themselves. Vincent sat near the entrance beneath a wide canopy where every visitor passed before entering. Samuel remained beside him, greeting each family by name whenever he could. Grace moved gracefully among the volunteers, helping young parents carry boxes, serving coffee, and making certain no child stood alone for very long. Lily had proudly accepted the responsibility of handing every child a free bookmark decorated with colorful drawings she had created herself. At the bottom of each bookmark, she had carefully written the same sentence in bright blue letters. "Kindness always finds its way home." Throughout the morning, children laughed as they listened to stories. Neighbors introduced themselves to strangers, and employees from Romano Manor worked shoulder to shoulder with local volunteers without caring who held what title. Vincent quietly watched the scene unfold with a peaceful expression Samuel had not seen since before the accident. "Your mother would have loved this," Samuel said softly. Vincent nodded. She always believed a home should become larger every time it welcomed someone new. Just after noon, several expensive black vehicles slowly entered the long driveway. Men and women dressed in tailored suits stepped out carrying elegant gift boxes, expensive flower arrangements, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Samuel recognized nearly every face immediately. Former business partners, influential associates, social leaders who had quietly disappeared after Vincent's accident. They approached with polished confidence, offering warm greetings as though no distance had ever existed between them. One executive extended his hand. "Vincent, we wanted to congratulate you on reopening the foundation. Vincent accepted the handshake politely, but without excitement. Thank you for coming. Another smiled broadly. We should have visited sooner. Vincent answered with complete calm. Yes, you should have. There was no anger in his voice. No accusation. Only simple truth. The visitors glanced around the lively gardens where volunteers, employees, and neighborhood families laughed together without paying much attention to their arrival. They had expected to become the center of the event. Instead, they found themselves quietly blending into a celebration that no longer depended upon influence or reputation. Grace noticed the awkward expressions from across the garden, but chose to continue helping a young mother carry books to her car. Lily remained focused on giving away her handmade bookmarks one by one, smiling just as brightly for every child regardless of their clothes or background. Watching them, Vincent understood that genuine generosity never paused simply because important people had entered the room. A few minutes later, he slowly wheeled himself onto the small wooden stage, prepared for welcoming remarks. The conversations gradually softened until the gardens became peacefully quiet. Vincent looked across hundreds of familiar and unfamiliar faces before speaking. Many years ago, I believed success was measured by how many powerful people remembered my name. Then life became unexpectedly quiet, and I discovered something much more valuable. He paused, allowing his eyes to find Grace and Lily standing together near the front row. The people who arrive when they gain nothing are the people who teach us everything. Gentle applause spread across the audience. Some visitors lowered their eyes thoughtfully. Others smiled through tears. Vincent continued. This foundation will never exist to celebrate one person. It will exist to remind every family that hope grows strongest when kindness is offered without expecting applause. As the applause slowly faded beneath the warm afternoon breeze, Samuel looked toward Grace and quietly whispered. He thought he was rebuilding a foundation. Grace smiled gently as children laughed beneath the oak trees. He was rebuilding a family all along. 1 year later, the morning sun rose over Romano Manor with the same golden warmth that had once illuminated an empty birthday table, yet everything else had quietly changed. The long dining room was alive with conversation instead of silence. Fresh flowers filled every corner of the mansion. Children's laughter drifted through open windows, and volunteers carrying books, blankets, and baskets of homemade food walked comfortably through the front doors as though they had always belonged there. The annual community birthday celebration had become a tradition, not because of wealth or prestige, but because one afternoon had reminded an entire city that compassion could restore what loneliness had nearly stolen. Vincent sat beside the grand window in the same handcrafted wheelchair, wearing another perfectly tailored black suit. The intricate tattoos across his hands remained a reminder of the life he had lived, yet the expression on his face belonged to a man who had finally found peace with the life still waiting before him. Samuel approached, carrying a familiar tray of coffee, and smiled. "Happy birthday, sir." Vincent accepted the cup with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, my friend." Samuel laughed softly. "Last year I worried no one would come." Vincent looked toward the front entrance, where cheerful voices already echoed through the hall. "I do not believe that will be a problem today." As if the house itself wished to prove him right, the front doors opened once more. Grace entered carrying a homemade apple pie, while Lily, now a little taller than the year before, proudly held another handmade birthday card decorated with bright colors and careful lettering. Behind them came teachers, firefighters, nurses, gardeners, neighbors, volunteers, and families whose lives had crossed paths through the Romano Foundation. No one waited for an invitation to smile. No one cared who had once been important. They gathered because they wanted to be there. Lily hurried toward Vincent with the excitement only a child could carry so honestly. "I made another wish for you," she announced proudly. Vincent accepted the card with both hands. Inside, written in steadier handwriting than the year before, were simple words that made him pause. "I wish that you would never wonder again if you are loved." He looked up, unable to hide the emotion in his eyes. Grace smiled gently. "She has been working on that card for 2 weeks." Vincent folded it carefully before placing it inside the breast pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. It is the finest birthday gift I have ever received. Throughout the afternoon, children filled the library with stories while volunteers served meals beneath the old oak tree. The mansion no longer felt like a monument to success. It had become a home where strangers arrived as guests and quietly left as friends. As the celebration drew to a close, the final rays of sunlight painted the gardens in warm shades of gold. Grace walked beside Vincent along the stone pathway, while Samuel and Lily remained a respectful distance behind, giving them a rare moment of quiet. Vincent looked toward the oak tree where everything had truly begun. "You changed my life the moment you walked through those gates," he said softly. Grace shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, I only knocked on the door. You were the one who chose to open it." Vincent reached for her hand. She welcomed his hand with quiet confidence, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. There were some truths too meaningful for many words. Finally, Grace leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss upon his forehead, a simple gesture filled with affection, gratitude, and hope. Vincent closed his eyes briefly, smiling with the peaceful certainty that the emptiest birthday of his life had become the beginning of the richest chapter he had ever known. Nearby, Lily laughed as Samuel helped children light candles on another homemade cake, and the voices of friends echoed through Romano Manor until evening settled gently across the gardens. The mansion had not been transformed by money, influence, or forgotten reputations. It had been transformed by one unexpected knock, one child willing to believe that nobody should celebrate alone, and one quiet decision to choose kindness over obligation. In the end, Vincent discovered that the greatest family is not always the one you inherit. Sometimes it is the one that walks through your front door carrying a homemade cake, a handful of wildflowers, and a heart that refuses to let another soul be forgotten.